So, welcome to 2022. Happy New Year. Are you planning events for 2022? Because if you are, I would guess that you're already having the conversation, either with yourself or with other people, about do we do our events in a virtual environment? Do we make them hybrid? Or do we have our events in person? Have you noticed that we've now got to have a means of distinguishing events that happen with people all together in the same room? You know, we used to just talk about events and it was implied that people would be together in the same room. But now we have this different category. We have in-person events. So I've been thinking about this as well. I've been thinking a lot about it because we've all really been forced over the last couple of years to get used to doing our events in virtual space. And I think as a consequence of that, I've certainly learned a lot more about what's possible doing it that way and what some of the benefits might be. I've also learned something about the downside. So here are some thoughts. This is not going to be a comprehensive run through everything because there are so many things to consider. And this is something that we're going to be talking about at the event on the 20th of January. And so there may well be some follow-up to that. But just that whole business of why do we need to get together? Now, if you were to go and talk to a finance director in a lot of organisations, they probably would say, you know, this whole thing about virtual events has been brilliant because the impact in terms of what we've had to spend on meeting venues, on travel expenses, etc., catering, that's all gone down. That's plummeted. Because people don't need to leave home, they don't need to leave the office. They can sit at their desk and have meetings with people the other side of the country, the other side of the world, perfectly successfully. And to some extent, I agree with that. I think a lot of us have discovered that there are things that perhaps, pre-pandemic, we might have jumped in the car or on a train and gone to somebody's office and had a meeting, maybe for a relatively short period of time, perhaps less time than it took to travel. I think that's all been challenged now. And we're thinking much more about, why not just get on a video call and have that meeting? So there's clearly a lot of benefit to be gained from using the virtual technology and having our meetings virtually. But what are we missing out on if we do that? Well, for one thing, we're missing out on building proper relationships. Now, I say this against a backdrop of having been pleasantly surprised at how well I felt people have connected with each other in online meetings and online training programs and so on. So I'm not saying that we don't kind of create any sort of connection. But what I'm hearing from people is that having met somebody on a virtual event, they feel a bit less likely to approach that person outside of the meeting for further advice or conversation, that they'd be less inclined to pick up the phone to talk to that person or invite them to something else or consult them if there was something that they, hoped that other person could help with. That it's not as deep a connection as it might be if you'd been in the same room with somebody. And there's a number of reasons why that happens. One is for starters, when we're on video calls, we basically see each other from about here upwards. One of my pet hates is people who have the end of the frame here, so it's like they're resting their chin on the bottom of the screen. I do like to see a little bit of shoulders as well, if I can, because we learn so much about people from being able to see their body language. And no, I'm not suggesting that we should all have cameras far enough away that we can get a full-length shot of everybody. But being able to see a little bit more than just somebody's face makes a difference to how well we feel that we know them. So that's one thing. There's also all the informal stuff that goes on when you have an event in person. And I know for myself, I'm running training programs online. One of the things I've really missed has been the informal conversation in tea breaks, over lunch, at the end of the day. Because my experience is that often it will be at the end of the day that maybe even walking out to their car, that somebody will ask me a question that perhaps was the thing that they most wanted to know, but during the day they just didn't get to the point to feel comfortable to ask the question. So I've missed that informal connection that happens when people all get together in the same place. And I think you get a different kind of bond. When people sit in the same room for a meeting or a training program, eat the same pastries in the coffee break. They get distracted by the same noise the other side of the wall. They are affected by the same weather conditions. They're having a shared experience. Whereas when you're all on screen together, you're having a shared experience, but not at that sort of physiological level in quite the same way. It's more of a mental thing. So I think that's why sometimes people feel that if they've met somebody online, they haven't met them, they haven't connected with them as completely as they might have done if they'd met in person. And so the knock-on effect for that in terms of how we run our businesses and how we work together, it just means that the kind of professional relationships that we're making through virtual events are subtly different from the kind of relationships we might have made in the past. And I'm a little bit concerned that in some cases we're in danger of forgetting what it's like to actually make eye contact with another person, because you're not making eye contact on a virtual meeting. You might think you are because you can see somebody's face and they appear to be looking at you, but that's not actually eye contact. And when you're in a virtual meeting, you miss out on all those little things where, one person's talking and two people exchange a glance. You don't know who's looking at you on a virtual meeting. Actually, they're probably looking at themselves because, unless you've got in the habit of turning off the view of yourself on the screen, it's very hard not to keep stealing a glance or indeed just watching yourself to make sure that you're not doing anything stupid or embarrassing, or that you don't look, presenting yourself in a way that you don't want to be seen. So that's a huge distraction. And so we don't know who's looking at us. We can't make eye contact across a meeting table if we're in virtual space. So those are some of the downsides of not actually being present. And I can tell you also that I think from my perspective as a trainer, running a virtual event, the cut-off point always feels quite brutal. When you've run a day's training with a group of people and you're kind of getting to know people and connecting a little bit on a sort of more individual level, then at the end of the day, when we've finished what we're doing for the day, people are still there. People still chat. People come and say good night, and maybe they ask a few more questions. We potter about and tidy up and so on. And we kind of gradually wind down from the intensity of the event down to being ready to go on to the next phase of the day. When you're online, you press end meeting for all and everybody's gone. It's quite brutal, actually. And there you are sitting at your desk. It's like, okay, now what do I do? And that transition is quite difficult. So I think if you're planning meetings, it's worth thinking about what really is the purpose of this meeting, not just in terms of the work, but also in terms of the relationships. And are we looking to build a relationship long term with a new customer or a new supplier? Are we looking to bed in a team? Are we wanting to help people understand how to work together more effectively? Because if there are some of those more personal, relational aspects to the need for an event, then it's probably worth considering doing at least some of it in person. And even if you decide on this occasion, let's make it a virtual event, I'd like to encourage you not to go down the route of just doing everything on screen. Probably like me, you're probably a bit tired of looking at screens. We've all done a lot of it in recent years. But I think I don't want us to lose sight of the fact that can be really beneficial. But I think the time now is to stand back and go, okay, right, so we know it's good for this and that's, and it's not so good for that. And start to be more intelligent about the choices that we make, about what's the best medium for a given event. So there's some food for thought. As I said, there'll be more discussion about this at the event on the 20th of January. And I hope you can join us there.